All right, welcome everyone. We are doing a brown bag today on the sphere section object model. Before we get started, if you look in the issue regarding this brown bag, there is a UML document which talks about the database model. And that's one of the things that we're going to be going over today. For those that are not familiar with UML, UML is just a way of visually representing what's in the database. So you can take a look at the UML document. It's a little intimidating at first, but when you get into it, it's really just a series of fields and data types. And so as we're designing things on the front end or working on things in the back end, that is essentially the reference for any data that is available for Secure. So the goal of today's meeting is to go through parts of this model, explain what the fields are, why they're there, the different types of values that are available for that, and any limitations that we know about. There's also a document that we will probably loosely follow for our agenda. And that's the intro. I'll hand it over to Fabian. And Fabian, if you want to kind of walk us through the approach for today.
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to share. Hang on, these slides. Oh, these pages, sorry. Yes. Okay. Oh, yeah. So that's the issue for the brown bag session of today. As you said, it's going to be on the secure data model. So that's the model we've got in the REST backend, not to be confused with the JSON report, though the two are related. I get back to that. And I guess we should start with this intimidating diagram that represents all the classes we've got in the REST backend, all the models. But first, I have to roll back a bit. So the way it works is that at the beginning, we've got a GitLab project, a repo for this GitLab project. Users push commits, and assuming that the CI configuration has security scans configured, that triggers scanning jobs. And these scanning jobs, security scanning jobs, will generate security reports, JSON reports, following this secure JSON syntax. And in the end, because of whatever happens in the backend, these classes, or some of these classes, or some of these objects, sorry, get created. So yeah, can you see my pointer? I guess you can. Yes. Okay. Mm-hmm. So again, when we scan project, a GitLab project, we get that creates some of these objects. So it creates, for instance, this occurrence object, which in fact is a vulnerability finding. It creates identifier objects, scanner objects. Actually, all these objects belong to a project. All these objects belong to a project, and are created when security reports are scanned and passed by the backend. Whereas this one, the issue link, and this one, the feedback, are created by users. So we've got the stuff here, the models, created by the parsers we've got in the backend, and we've got these two created by users. Just to give you an overview of the models we've got. Also, we have to make a distinction between what's been there for a while. So these classes have been there for maybe 1 year, 2 years, yeah, probably 2 years. Whereas these two, vulnerability and issue link, were introduced recently as part of the first class vulnerability MVC. And Ross, Lucas, I can see you here. So, and you are the experts here about the first class vulnerability epic. So yeah, we may get back to that later on. Also, this one, security scan, was introduced recently. It's not totally used at the moment. It's still new in this data model. All that to say that it's evolving, some of the classes, some of the models, sorry, have been there for a while and are used when you click on the interface when you render a list of security findings, vulnerability findings. Some of them, sorry, are models that are created but not fully used, not at the moment. Yeah, so I guess we can move on to the models. Do you have any questions, or maybe you want to make comments on that?
Yeah, one question I had is you talked about how these get populated when a scan is run.
Yeah.
Can you just briefly touch on which scan? Is that a scan that is on master? Is that a scan that is on a branch pipeline? When do these get populated? And is there a specific point in time that these get populated?
So whenever, actually, I've got the code here, I believe. So that's part of the, where it all starts with the state machine that belongs to the pipeline model. And you can have pipelines for every branch. It doesn't matter that this is the default branch, master branch, or another branch actually. So whenever a branch is as a pipeline, the pipeline will collect reports and create and parse the reports. I don't use specific words there, but maybe I can use, I don't know how precise I should get here. But short answer, you can, as long as you get a pipeline running, whatever the branch is, you'll have the security reports passed by the backend. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so will occurrences, if I have a branch called sets branch and it finds like 2 vulnerabilities, or I believe they're called occurrences right now, or findings, will those go into the database and that'll be for Seth's feature branch?
Some, yeah, though not everything. I don't know if maybe we should keep that specific question for later,
Okay.
because it's worth a deep dive, I believe.
Okay.
Unless someone can make it short, I don't know. Yes.
My short answer is no. I think the occurrences are only created for the default branch. Is there a nuance I'm missing?
Yes, that's though I believe. Yeah, you're right. Actually, yes, default branch. That's the way it works.
And so I would assume that's the default branch at the time that the pipeline is run, right? Because I could go into GitLab and change my default branch.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So that would be the vulnerability model. And Seth, I can see you've got many questions on this model. But again, that's a new model. It belongs to the first class vulnerability backend MVC. So I don't know if I should spend too much time on this one. Maybe I should start with the legacy models, so to speak. I mean, the models that have been there for a while. Yes, yep. Lucas, you agree? Thank you for the feedback, visual feedback. Same goes for IssueLink. It's a new one. By the way, Lucas, Russ, do you know if that one is used at the moment, the IssueLink?
I would say no, it is not used.
I don't think so. Okay,
currently.
Thank you. I wasn't sure about that one. The model seems functional, but it's not enough to have a model. So yeah, so what we have here, all the, yeah, except for this one, models currently used in the backend. We've got the, oops, sorry, we've got the occurrence. Where is that? Oh, anyways, I can open here. Or maybe I should go back to the model, to the diagram. So the occurrence is a finding, and technically corresponds to a vulnerability of a JSON report. So whenever there's, well, actually that's not so simple, but first approximation, when there's a vulnerability in the vulnerabilities JSON array in the JSON report, that is translated to an occurrence object in the data model. Does that make sense? So we have one JSON object, one vulnerability JSON object. It, as an approximation, I would say that it becomes an occurrence object. And again, and thank you, Abby, if this is the default branch. Okay. And so going back to this. So this occurrence has generic fields that describe the vulnerability in general, what type of vulnerability that is. We mostly rely on the identifiers to do that, to describe the vulnerability. For instance, in the case of dependency scanning, we would have CVE identifiers. That's one identifier that describes the vulnerability finding. Another example, in the case of dependency scanning, or actually SAS, or all sorts of vulnerability findings, we have CWE IDs that describe the kind of vulnerability flow that we have found. All that to say that we've got different sets of identifiers. We combine all them, we aggregate all them in the finding. So in the finding is the aggregation of these identifiers saying what kind of vulnerability that is and the location. All that is combined in the same object. This is what we have found and where it has been found in the project. The occurrence, the finding itself already belongs to the project, but the occurrence object also tells where precisely it has been found. For instance, if it comes from SAS, it will tell the line of the file and which file generates the vulnerability flow. I mean, where it has been found. Okay, so that's, and sorry, it was a bit confusing. At first, I hope it's getting better. So we've got this finding. The finding has a location and it has identifiers. Going back to the model, we can see the occurrence, the security finding, and identifiers here. Also, the findings are reported by a security scanner, and this is what we store in the scanner model. Okay.
So my question on the scanner model is, do you know when those entries are made into that database table? So for example, we have a JSON report, and we can throw in a bunch of different scanners in there. Will that create new entries into that table?
Yes, I mean, if we scan the default branch, yes. And answering one of your questions, it was somewhere in the document, the identifiers and the scanners belong to the project. They are in the scope of the project. And we do that so that scanning, processing a report in the context of one project won't have any side effect on some other project, unrelated project belonging to someone else in a different context. These are scoped. That's very important because the name of the scanner and the ID of the scanner come from the JSON report, and technically it's possible to push everything. You can set a job that creates a JSON document, a JSON report that is declared as such in the CI configuration file. and there you can set the scanner to XYZ. Why not? I know you had a question on that. Do you?
Yeah.
see what I'm-
So for example, if we have a JSON document that comes from a third party, and that's third party scanner 123, and
Yeah.
that JSON document looks exactly like our traditional JSON document.
Yeah, it follows the syntax. Yeah.
So that scanner 123, scanner third party 123 will show up in the scanner table.
Yes.
Okay.
And again, it belongs to the project.
Yep. Yeah. So no other project.
It doesn't leak. It doesn't leak in any way.
Yep.
And it asserted. That's the same for the identifiers in the context of finding actually. But anyways, so scanners are asserted in the context of a project. So if you push twice the same 2 consecutive reports at the same time, you will use existing scanner in the context of the project. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, do you have any questions at this point? I'm sure you have. Seth, on the occurrence, also known as findings. I have to go back to the documents, but I know you had questions on the occurrence model.
Yeah, so I think a couple that I had is the occurrence. One was around the field type of binary. What the binary means, and particularly around feedback, vulnerabilities feedback. And actually, if you go to the other UML document, in the issue, you can see the different data types. And I was curious if there's a reason that some of those fingerprints are binary and one of them is a string. That seems like it might be difficult to query against.
Yeah, a short answer is yes, but I don't remember.
Okay.
And yeah, sadly enough, it's not documented in the code, but I'm again, as far as I remember, there were technical limitations. Yeah, I have to investigate on that. Investigate that, sorry. But about vulnerability feedback, and maybe I should spend some time on that. The way it works, so this feedback model keeps track of whether an occurrence, a finding has been dismissed, or whether there's an issue for an occurrence. And the way the 2 models are connected is via the project fingerprint. And it's a sort of loose connection. It's not ideal. Anyways, all that to say that it has limitations, and we are aware of that, and we have issues about moving on to something else. And to move on to something else that would not be invalidated when the vulnerability finding moves in the code. I mean, when its location changes. Right now, this is a limitation we have. Anyways, maybe I shouldn't say too much about this at this point.
I think it's a little bit helpful though in discussing why that was in the first place. Rather, if we have an unpersisted object, how do we uniquely identify it across different branches? And so we combine as many things as we could together to keep like a fingerprint, hence the term fingerprint. But that's tricky to track, like if a vulnerability moves around and has different line numbers and it's in a different file, etc. So I just think that's helpful historical context.
Yeah, so back in the days, actually that's still the way it works. The scanners generating these JSON reports are responsible for creating fingerprints, and a fingerprint combines the location of a finding and the kind of finding that is. So for instance, in the context of SAS, it would combine the file path, the line number, and and the kind of vulnerability flow, for instance, as SQL injection, something like that. It would combine all that. And it works because if you in the UI, if you dismiss that, this setting, so to speak, this preference is kept as you push new commits, run new pipelines, and create new reports for the default branch, because the fingerprint remains the same. The limitation is that if we prepend lines at the beginning of the file where the vulnerability finding has been found, then we lose the vulnerability feedback because the fingerprint has changed. So we need a way to update the feedback as the code changes. And we have issues about that. To make it short, it would be to first to replace the project fingerprint with a combination of the location fingerprint and identifiers, and then we would have to update the location as the code changes, because when a file is renamed, location has to be updated. When the file gets new lines, the location has to be updated. For instance, in the context of SAST. That was the long answer.
So right now, if the line number changes, your fingerprint becomes invalid, or
Yeah.
it can't match that,
Yeah.
or a file name or something else.
Yes, that's one limitation, and another one is that the project fingerprint has to be generated by the scanner itself, and we want to simplify the scanners so that they are not responsible for that anymore.
Right. So that requires a scanner to understand the repo, like the actual file name, things like that.
Well, they've got access to the repo. The problem is that we shouldn't rely on the scanners to implement all that. It's something that has been that should be shared among all the scanners.
Yep.
It doesn't make sense to have that complexity in the scanners themselves. Yeah. So shall we move on? Other questions on the feedback? Yes, no, okay. Yes, there are a few words I wanted to say about, actually, I wanted to show some code. So these, I don't know if you can see the URL. These are the security parsers. Actually, they have been updated by CAM recently. And for instance, we've got a common parser, and I think it is. So that's the one. That's a code responsible for parsing the JSON reports and turning that into objects, and eventually into models we store in the database. And extracting occurrences, extracting scanners, extracting identifiers. And so that's the common parser. And then we've got specific ones like this one for dependent scanning on top of the common parser. It's pretty generic, actually. Yes, and as you can see, it creates, again, occurrences, scanners, identifiers, and that's it. And these are the three tables I talked about at the beginning. Okay. Do you have specific questions on identifiers, Seth? I have to go back to the list.
Actually, I have some, so I'm not sure I
Camilla,
understand
okay.
it correct. I understand correctly. So, just like there is something called feedback type, which you said is about dismissal. I got it. And how can it be an issue or MR? Like, I mean, what user can do to change type to issue or MR?
Do you want to know the way it's implemented, or do you want to know more about the limitations and what's possible with the current model?
I want to know that, like, when you design it, what do you think are the cases that the type can change to issue MR? I understand vulnerability linked to an issue, linked to an MR, but how could be the feedback type be an MR or issue?
Just to clarify, that won't change. A given vulnerability occurrence can have multiple feedback types, so it can be related to an issue, it can be related to an MR, and it can be related to a dismissal. So it won't change.
Oh, okay. It won't change. It's just like one-to-many relation. You can have a MR. Okay, now I get it.
And those are created specifically from an action. So if you click the create issue, it creates that feedback type immediately. So those are only created through like specific actionable steps conducted by a user or maybe auto remediation.
Cool. And another question related to this. So like one vulnerability, like this feedback type is related to vulnerability occurrence or vulnerability?
Occurrence.
Occurrence. So will it happen when vulnerability have like two occurrence? One is dismissal, one is not?
Sorry, what is your question? You mean?
Sorry, she's referring to when we get to one-to-many, I believe. Is that right? So when we have one vulnerability that has multiple findings, and we're not there yet, so there isn't an answer for that problem yet. But that is absolutely something we'll have to take into consideration and guard against when we get that far.
Right now we've got feedback for the findings only. That corresponds to the occurrence model. That's all we have.
The way that we originally discussed that with Andy, and I don't know if we're going to go that way, would be if you were to take an action of dismissing a vulnerability, it would trigger feedback dismissals for all of its related findings. So a vulnerability is kind of like an aggregate of its findings.
Yeah, that's like what I imagine as well. I just want to double sure because here I thought that, yeah, it could have unlimited like relationship one-to-many and it might change. So it clears my question. Thank you.
Sorry, can we just back up? So when we have a feedback, you're saying there's three types. It could be a dismissal, an MR, or an issue. So if you have a finding and you open an issue based on that, that's when you would get a feedback type of issue. Or if you open up an MR based on that, that's when you would get that record. All right, I'm getting nods. Cool. All right, I just wanted to make sure. Cool, thanks.
Actually, maybe now is a good point to actually talk about that issue link model, which is for the purpose of linking issues to vulnerabilities, not occurrences/findings. We're not currently using that. I left a comment that I don't know if we should on the issue, but that's worth mentioning that we are currently like in the process of maybe changing how issues are linked there. So there's not much more to say because we're not using that currently, but something to keep in mind.
So along those lines, so do you know when we decide or what the process is for figuring out whether we use that? And then I know you said we're not using it, but is link type in there? Is that designed for blocks related to relationship?
It is, and I don't think it should be.
The link type?
Yeah. Okay, so the really short 30-second answer to that is we're getting kind of confusing with our data models where an issue is a unit of work in GitLab, and we're starting to make vulnerabilities a unit of work. So if you have a vulnerability that blocks an issue, how do you track the unit of work of handling the vulnerability? You need to create an issue, and then two things are blocking the same object, and it creates a more complex like object graph. So I don't think that we should have like a relationship between issues and vulnerabilities. We should have just issues linked to vulnerabilities and keep it simple as that. But I'll link to my comment on that if anyone wants to chime in on the issue on that.
Yeah, as I was reading this last night, the model, I had a lot of questions of like how that would actually work in the interface. Perfect.
Questions? Anyone?
What's the pipeline? What's the pipeline's relationship to all of this in terms of the data model? What is the occurrence pipeline?
Well, the occurrence belongs to a pipeline, and so Seth had questions on that. I don't fully remember the background story, right, Seth?
Yeah, no. So the question I had was, so you're going to have that JSON report, which is going to come from a pipeline, but it actually comes from a deeper spot, which is the job, or in our model, job. So everyone knows jobs and builds are actually the same thing in the Rails model. But basically a JSON report comes from a build. And so my question was, if you look at the object model, why it goes through pipeline, then to build, as opposed to just being linked directly to build.
Yes, and the short answer is I don't remember why we decided to do that. But there would be benefits from connecting the findings to the job, because then we would be able to give to present the reports as we process the jobs. We wouldn't have to. Ideally, we would know where it comes from, and possibly we could have partial reports. Not partial reports, but pipelines containing a few reports. But where some reports would be missing because some jobs would be failing. I think we should do that. We should process as much as possible and be as accurate as possible. But I don't remember a time to create an issue, I believe, about possibly moving the findings from the pipelines to the jobs. Maybe because of the lifespan of jobs compared to a lifespan of pipelines, and because it's possible to rerun a job in the context of the pipeline, the same security scanning job. I think it's because of that, but I'm not sure. I don't remember. Does that make sense?
Partially.
Yeah.
Do you know, I know there's been issues about like the dashboard going blank when this might be a bigger issue, where the pipeline where jobs fail in the pipeline. So for example, in this object model, does occurrence, because it's relying on the pipeline, does the entire pipeline have to succeed? Or if like one security job fails and another one doesn't, do you know if those get parsed?
I believe the pipeline has to complete, but it just, I've got to go back to the code. Does anyone remember? I'm saying that because I had to look at the state machine moments ago.
Could you ask that again?
Yeah, do you know if it has, the pipeline has to complete for the reports to be passed by the backend? As far as I remember,
so.
I believe so, yeah.
It used to be, I don't know if we changed that, but that definitely used to be the case.
Which is not ideal, I believe. I wish it was possible to have security findings showing up as they get processed by the backend as it goes.
Yeah, because for example, if you have one secure, I'm just thinking kind of out loud, if you have a couple of jobs that are really quick, and then you have one job that takes a very long time, and you've got to wait for that really long job to get those security results, that could be unfortunate, or you may want to avoid having that really long security job.
Yeah, maybe you can take action. Maybe you can fix that one without waiting for the other ones. I mean, you can fix a few findings without waiting for the other scanning jobs. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely right. Things like your dependencies, if you just have bad, outdated dependencies, those are really quick to fix, and you shouldn't have to wait for the other things to finish.
Maybe it's time to say a few words about the new scan model. So I'm going to share the screen again. So it is, yes, it is. So this,
sorry, just to finish that up, I looked this up. The reason that we can't parse until the pipeline is finished is because if we're doing a collective diff of the reports, then we can't process them independently. We need to process them completely. So, yeah.
Well, maybe that's a UX issue in the end. What do you think? That's because it would be complicated to present the complexity of having some reports, but not all of them.
Yeah, so we have talked about this in other capacities as well. Like with the new scan model, we discussed things like showing a percentage of a scan. So within the merge request widget, we could say we've only scanned 20% so far, and among 20%, there's 0 new vulnerabilities. And then someone clicks merge when pipeline succeeds, and they don't realize that there could be more vulnerabilities coming in later in the pipeline. So that's why we wait until the pipeline is finished.
Yeah. But again, maybe that's a UX issue.
To understand it, so when the pipeline is not finished, we are able to show user like the findings which already found in the 20% which are finished.
Yeah, because any job could upload a findings report, and when we're running a Node.js scan and a Ruby scan, then they could upload at different points. So if we show a partial data set, we either need to be very, very clear in the interface that it's partial, or just not show anything until the full thing is finished, which is what we currently do.
How about the history? So this is the second time I run the pipeline for the same branch, and the previous one got successful. The new one is not. The previous one found 100, the new one found 20. And like we kind of know both, right? We know the history past 100 from the previous pipeline. We know the 20% of the current one, which is not finished.
Yeah, but in this case, it isn't different pipelines, it's jobs within a single pipeline. So within a single pipeline, if you have a scan Ruby, scan Node, and run test job, if it's just run scan Ruby, then if we show only the results of that one, we're not being clear that we're not, there could be more findings that we'll find later.
Yeah, that's part I know. I just want to there is a case that, for example, I run 2 pipelines. Both of them have exactly the same job. One Ruby, one something else. And the pipeline 1 runs successfully with, but we show a vulnerability different related to job, not 2 pipelines only, right?
Well, it's different between the target or the source branch and the target branch, which are 2 pipelines, but they're not pipelines of the same
commit.
Commit.
Yeah, commit.
Okay, I think I get it. I will maybe.
But yeah, we compare all the findings of the same kind. So let's say SAST between the latest pipeline of the source branch and the latest pipeline of the target branch. The thing is, we can have findings of one report type coming from multiple jobs. So we can have, for instance, 3 SaaS jobs, one for Java, one for Python, whatnot. And we couldn't even render a progress bar because in the backend, we don't know what's coming in. We just know that we got jobs, possibly generating reports. Well,
yeah, I get it. I think that's more or less on the UX side what we decide to show to the user, either let them run again or show partially. I think we Right. Yeah.
So more generally on this topic, does anyone see the need for streaming results for some of the other scanners? I don't know how long some of the SAS and some of those other scanners take. Is that a pressing use case, I think, for the scanners that everyone's working on?
I think we don't even have an issue for that. That would be interesting, though.
Yeah, I don't know if that would be useful in the case of a merge request. It would make more sense in the case of a default branch, I think, because that in the case of a default branch, you would need more pressing notifications, like there's now a vulnerability. Unless we're just talking about showing things more quickly in the merge request widget.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons I'm just bringing this up is I don't know the extent and how long some of the scans take. Certainly, I think we're talking about like a deep scan of secrets. That might potentially take, hours or days to run. On the DAS side, if we were to run a deep scan of your website, a DAS scan could take hours. So waiting all that time before you can get the results might not be practical.
So in that case, instead of generating a JSON document, we would push a JSON to a JSON stream, render small documents containing small bits of data, and we would have the backend processing that in real time. That would be useful for DAS. I'm not surprised you're asking this question now.
So maybe just
go ahead.
like splitting and parallelizing multiple jobs would be the way to currently do that. Because currently
that
the way
would be the
jobs
workaround.
work,
Yeah, right now that's a workaround. Though that wouldn't work for SAS, for instance. I mean, depending. Most of the time for SAS and scanning, it takes a long time because we've got to build the project, so to speak, install the dependencies, and compile, possibly compile the project. So it takes a long time doing that, and then the scans doesn't take that long. So I think that it won't make any difference for SAS and in scanning, but for DAS, yes, it would help. Yeah, time to create an issue, Seth.
Sounds good.
I will add though that's not something that I think we have control over right now, because it's part of the way that the verification state, the verify stage handles jobs, which is artifacts get uploaded at the end of the job. Unless we have a different process, which
it's
is
out of
like
reach.
Yeah, it's not a trivial thing to implement. So before we got into this, I think we were going to talk a little bit about the security scan model. I don't know if anyone wanted to address any additional topics on that. Yeah, so the one note that I'll add for the security scan model and part of the genesis for this model was right now it's been hard to understand, as Fabian explained, all the vulnerabilities go into the database after a report is parsed. And one of the challenges we've had is if a report is parsed and there's no vulnerabilities, then no entries go into the database. And so there's a couple of bugs that are out there. For example, if you have bugs on your dashboard and then your next job finishes, what happens is it goes through the process Fabian explained, which is it parses it, it finds no vulnerabilities, it adds nothing to the database, and then on the dashboard, it shows the old vulnerabilities. So the scan model will now say, okay, I know that a DAS scan ran, I know a SAS scan ran, and it will know that a scan ran, it will see that there were 0 vulnerabilities, and it can zero out your dashboard. So it gives us a cleaner way of saying, when did the scan run? And if you query when the scans run, based on when the scan run, you can then find the vulnerabilities. So it gives you kind of that first anchor point to hold on to first, and then query vulnerabilities off that, as opposed to querying vulnerabilities which don't exist if a scan ran, but none were found. Yeah,
and to add to that, if I may, Seth, right now there's no way to make the difference between vulnerabilities because the job was not able to finish, and vulnerabilities because it's safe and can return no vulnerabilities at all, which is great. So right now we can't make the distinction between a very bad scenario where the scanning jobs are not properly setup possibly, and a very good scenario where there are no findings. It's all clear, which is bad. And also we don't have the possibility to tell users why it has failed. Users have to go to the scanning jobs where the scanning job where it failed to make sense of what's going on and fix the CI configuration possibly. That makes for bad UX, and that's one of the issues we are addressing with the scan model.
Yeah, so the scan model will allow us to do some new interfaces. So theoretically, we can just list out all the scans, and you can look at all the scans that ran, and then you can see which pipelines they were a member of. That would be very, very hard to do today. So it gives us a couple different windows into that data. So do we want to go through the vulnerabilities model and how that's related to first-class vulnerabilities? Ross, you want to give a few words on vulnerabilities?
I suppose. The idea for vulnerabilities is that they're going to be persistent, so we can link to them. They have a proper ID. The eventual plan is that a vulnerability will have multiple findings, but right now, vulnerabilities just have one finding, and that's I mean, the model supports one-to-many, but we're artificially enforcing the one-to-one relationship, I guess.
I've got a question at this point, Ross, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
Yes. So when you run 2 consecutive pipelines for the same branch, does it mean that you update the relationship so that the existing vulnerability object is now connected to the new finding?
So that depends on, so a new finding shouldn't be created.
Yeah, that's what I thought. It shouldn't be created. It's subsetted. No, so you don't even have to update. You don't even have to update the relationship between the two.
Right.
Yes. Sorry. My bad. Yeah.
No. This is great nuance. That's important to call out, I think, because so we do rely on the fingerprint to make sure it's the same. But like you were talking about before, if the location changes, we'll have that old vulnerability that is pointing to the old location, and we will create a new vulnerability that's pointing to the new location. This was a bit less of a problem in the current model, or the old model, if you will, because we just brought back vulnerabilities or occurrences rather from the last successful pipeline. So we wouldn't find that occurrence that happened on the previous pipeline. It would just disappear. But now we're retaining that and bringing in the new one. So the moving the location will cause duplicates to show up until we address that problem that you alluded to of kind of losing track of it.
Yeah, but using the new vulnerability model, it's possible to reconnect the existing vulnerability model to the new finding that is there because the location has changed, right? That was the idea initially. So you got to run one execution of the pipeline, one occurrence model, second execution of the pipeline is a different one because the location has changed, and either manually or automatically, let's say, you can reconnect the existing vulnerability object to the new finding. That was the plan, right? So
we need we need multiple findings per vulnerability to really do that properly. And we're not doing that yet.
Okay.
So what you could do is if we have auto promotion or whatever we're calling it now enabled, so a finding gets auto promoted to a vulnerability, then you could perhaps merge two vulnerabilities together to like reconnect those together. But again, for that, I think you would need multiple findings supported. And maybe we can do that now because we only are like kind of like pretending that it's a one-to-one relationship on the front end. It's more of a UI issue right now, but not on the data model. So we could do that, but I think it's just how confident are we in merging something again? Especially if we're like the point of having vulnerability first class is that we can attach something like an SLA to it. And if we're like secretly connecting things, that gets really tricky.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, if we had that logic to say, hey, the location changed and these are the same, actually these are the same occurrences, we could potentially, you know, inject it in that merge the default branch pipeline process to update the vulnerability to point from the old vulnerability occurrence to the new vulnerability occurrence, and avoid all these duplications.
But right now we observe
that's the future.
But right now we get rid of the old ones, so we would have to make significant changes to the way to process the reports and get rid of the old objects in the database, old records, I mean. Yes, anyways.
Yes.
So Ross, I have a couple fast fire questions perhaps on the vulnerabilities table.
Okay.
So I noticed we have things like milestone, epic ID, start date and due date, which seem very issue-like. And so my question was, is a vulnerability an issue? And maybe this is kind of what Lucas was talking about, like, what's the, like, how does that gonna work, or what's the plan there?
I hope Lucas has some answers. Fabian linked to the discovery. Largely, they haven't been used and I've ignored them. So I don't have the answers to that question.
I would say it's more epic-like than issue-like. At least that was the idea. So there can be many issues linked to vulnerability. Say you have one that is you need to do a dependency update and you need to change like when you're doing a dependency update, you need to change like a deprecated syscall to a different syscall. So that might be 2 units of work for a single like dependency vulnerability. So there's multiple issues that could link to a single vulnerability. And you treat like every other thing for an epic. You can attach a milestone, you can attach labels, you can do whatever, but it's not the unit of work. Issues are still the unit of work.
Cool.
Is that enough of an answer?
It gives me a little bit better idea of how this is coming together. And then the other question I had was, we have these overrides of severity and confidence. So I'm interested in how those are going to work and whether vulnerabilities really should, if the severity and confidence of those should really be overridden, or whether that's something that, whether that's really kind of more of a risk assessment in how I think of these vulnerabilities.
So the idea was that vulnerabilities work as an aggregate. So you think of a finding as essentially a finding's immutable. You can't manually override the location. You can't manually override the severity of a finding. But a vulnerability is something that you can modify. You can attach an SLA, you can close it, you can do whatever. And then it has these findings attached as almost like immutable metadata. So as a vulnerability, if we get requests a lot like, can I downgrade the severity of this specific finding? You can't downgrade the severity of a finding, but if you attach to a vulnerability, you can downgrade the severity of the finding via the vulnerability. And so we can set the override of the severity level on the vulnerability, and then we mark override true to just track, clear it out. If it's not overridden at the severity or confidence level, then it's just an aggregation of its findings.
Got it. So if I understand correctly, so the occurrence is, or the occurrence of the finding is really what our scanner is spitting out. And the vulnerability object is really, as a security analyst, it's my risk assessment of those findings. And so I look at all those findings and my risk assessment is, hey, this actually really doesn't matter because of A, B, and C. And I want to attach it here. And these are the units of work. And here's the issues. The vulnerability is my human layer on top of the actual findings.
Yep.
Cool.
I have a related question. So like I'm a user, I see the vulnerability now has one-to-one relationship to a finding, and the severity of the finding originally from the scanner is critical. And as a user, I change it to, let's say, medium. And then like later on, the pipeline runs again, and then like it finds the finding, and will there be a new finding attached to it? Or like the findings severity will just changed? So
It should track the finding. So if it's the same finding, nothing will happen. If there's a new finding, we don't currently have any plans to connect a new finding to an existing vulnerability.
So the question is how we define like those are exactly the same findings. Like every item on the finding occurrence, all the values need to be exactly the same.
That's the complicated, how do we track this using this occurrence identifier discussion, which is, it's complicated. But basically we look at like the specific line of code and the location and try and identify it that way. And currently if the line changes, then it breaks everything.
Oh, so like as the user, if like the developer commit a new thing and they just move the lines and the findings occurs like before on line 1, now it's line 5, it will identify it as different vulnerabilities. Different
Unfortunately,
findings.
currently, yes.
Okay.
And as a user though, within the context of a merge request, what you would see is vulnerability A is gone, vulnerability A is added. So it doesn't look that different from the merge request, but it will probably severely affect first-class vulnerabilities.
Okay. Do you think there's a possible way in the future that we know they are the same?
Well, there's an issue with that. There are cases that are doable, and that are cases that are really complex to deal with. And this is why it's sometime in the past we had the idea of making that manual, so that users can connect the dots when the backend is not about to do that. So, Lucas, do we still have an issue about that? I mean, well, I guess we
Just
still have
dropped
the
it in
issue.
the Zoom chat.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
there is an issue.
Yeah.
No,
No, I'm not talking about this one. Sorry, not talking about improving vulnerability recognition, because that would be automatic, and there are cases we can quite easily. I mean, there are cases we can handle, but there are more complex cases where it would make sense to have users connect the dots. So either using the vulnerability object, the new first-class vulnerability model, because then user could attach the new finding to the old one via the vulnerability model, the new vulnerability model. But anyways, I guess I wonder whether this is still an upcoming issue. I mean, not upcoming issue, but it's still something we plan to do in the short term. I can't find it anymore.
I don't know if we have an issue, but I think there should be one, and I have to drop in 8 seconds. So
okay.
if someone can create one, that would be great.
And I know we're running out of time. If you have any thoughts on the session or want follow-up sessions, please just add that to the issue, the brown bag, of things that we didn't cover today, or things that you'd like to go in more detail about. Add that as a comment to this brown bag, and then we'll try to schedule something. Sounds good. Well, thank you, Fabienne, and everyone else who helped put this together. Hopefully this was helpful. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you all.